Infinite, Eminem's first studio album, dropped on November 12th, 1996. And yep, it was cassette or vinyl only. No CDs, no slick digital release. He sold a bunch himself, right out of the trunk of his car in Detroit. It was recorded over several months in the Bass Brothers basement studio in Michigan, with production from Denon Porter and Eminem, and the Bass Brothers handling the executive side. It's 11 tracks long, making it his shortest full-length album. You've got appearances from Proof, IQ, Mr. Porter, 3, Time, Angela Workman, and even DJ Head on the interlude. But even with the variety, it sticks to a pretty tight runtime. Sampling is everywhere too. Tonight pulls from Googie and Tom Coppola, Maxine brings in Grover Washington Jr., Open Mike uses Curtis Mayfield, and Never Too Far pulls from Maze. There's even some Nas and A Tribe Called Quest woven into Jealousy Woes 2. Critics didn't exactly cheer. AllMusic gave it 2.5 out of 5. Some called it competent, but said M hadn't carved out his own identity yet. The Nas and AZ influences were strong, especially on Jealousy Woes 2. Rob Kenner said it lacked a distinct voice. Rolling Stone pointed out the surprisingly spiritual lyrics, which really stood out when compared to his later stuff. The overall sound leaned East Coast, lo-fi, and pretty stripped back. A lot of people saw it as a demo more than a debut. Commercially, it flopped. Eminem himself said he might have sold around 70 copies. Some estimates stretched that number closer to 1,000. A few were given away. Some were sold at local shows. Either way, it didn't move units. But that failure pushed him hard. It helped shape the birth of his Slim Shady alter ego, and the rest is history. Only the title track Infinite eventually made it onto digital platform. That happened 20 years later, on November 17, 2016. It was remixed and uploaded to his Vevo channel. That version is sometimes called the FBT Remix. They even dropped a short documentary called Partners in Rhyme to go along with it, showing behind-the-scenes clips and interviews from the album's creation. Physical copies of the original are now super rare. Collectors hunt for those early cassettes and vinyls, which has led to a flood of bootlegs. There are 2 covers floating around, the original color one, and a black and white version from an unofficial reissue that popped up in Europe around 2003. Even now, fans are split. Some see Infinite as raw but promising. Others think it's just a stepping stone, important more for what came after than for the album itself. Either way, it's a fascinating start. The Slim Shady LP. This was Eminem's second studio album and his first major label release, dropping on February 23, 1999. It came out under Aftermath, Interscope, and Web Entertainment. Recording started back in 1997, mostly in Studio 8 in Ferndale, but there was mixing done at Dre's house too. It runs just under an hour if you're counting the standard CD, with a bonus disc adding a few more minutes. Genre-wise, it mixes hardcore rap with horrorcore, G-Funk, and plenty of West Coast influence, especially thanks to the production. Now, Slim Shady isn't just a nickname, it's a full-on persona. The album leans into that dark alter ego hard. You get absurd violence, drug references, twisted humor, and a style that's as satirical as it is controversial. He's lashing out at everything from poverty to family dysfunction, all wrapped in exaggerated, wild storytelling. That's the engine of the album, and it's what got people's attention fast. Both positive and not so positive. Dr. Dre came in heavy as executive producer, alongside the Bass Brothers, Melman, and Eminem himself. Jimmy Iovine helped make the whole thing happen. After Slim Shady EP caught his ear, the first song Eminem and Dre worked on together, My Name Is, knocked it out in about an hour. No big deal. There were 20 tracks on the first disc, and a few extras on some versions. Notable singles include Just Don't Give a What, My Name Is, Guilty Conscience, and Role Model. The album recycled some tracks from earlier mixtapes, reworked for this official release. 97 Bonnie and Clyde, for example, had already appeared on the Slim Shady EP in a different form. These tracks were full of disturbing but clearly theatrical storytelling, very much by design. Chart-wise, the album debuted at number 2 on the Billboard 200, blocked from the top spot by TLC's Fan Mail. It did hit number 1 on the R&B and hip-hop chart. First week sales, around 283,000. It stuck around on Billboard for 100 weeks. That's nearly 2 years. In Canada, it went triple platinum. In the UK, it hit number 10 and stayed on the chart for over 100 weeks. Australia, Netherlands, and New Zealand all saw chart action too. In the US alone, it sold over 5 million. Globally, depending on which stats you believe, it's somewhere between 8 and 14 million. It won Best Rap Album at the Grammys, and My Name Is got Best Rap Solo Performance. This album didn't just introduce Slim Shady, it launched a career. By the way, if you guys want to subscribe, I'm gonna be posting every day. Thanks. Anyways, the Marshall Mathers LP. Eminem dropped this one on May 23, 2000, and it took over instantly. It clocked in at just over 70 minutes, stretched across 18 tracks, and hit listeners like a freight train. The album came out under Shady Records, Aftermath, and Interscope, and it followed up the Slim Shady LP with way more grit, way more anger, and a much sharper sense of identity. It was recorded over a tight schedule in Detroit and other studios, and the production lineup was stacked. Eminem, Dr. Dre, the Bass Brothers, Melman, and the 45 King. But beyond the music, what made this album stand out was the split personality running through it. Slim Shady the lunatic, Marshall the tortured writer, and Eminem, the public figure trying to juggle both. The guest list included Dido on Stan, Bizarre on Amityville, Sticky Fingas, and RBX on Remember Me, and Paul Rosenberg doing his usual industry lawyer routine on a skit. There were others, but the main spotlight never left Eminem. He owned every second. The real Slim Shady was added last minute and turned into a radio juggernaut. Meanwhile, Stan became legendary with its twisted fan letter narrative and haunting sample from Dido. Kim was brutal, so brutal that the clean version of the album replaced it entirely with The Kids. That track had the label scrambling, wondering if they could even release it. Then you had The Way I Am, which was Eminem's unfiltered response to the fame avalanche. He wrote it solo, venting about critics, media pressure, and industry expectations. The lyrical content wasn't pulling punches. He name-dropped 49 celebrities across the album and fired off barbs at pop stars, actors, and cultural figures. The tone, flipped between comedy, horror, and reflection, was just as dense as it was aggressive. Some moments were pure satire. Others were angry confessionals. Critics couldn't look away. Sales were wild. First week in the US, around 1,760,000 copies. It shattered the previous rap record and stayed #1 on the Billboard 200 for 8 straight weeks. By the end of its first month, it had sold over 3 million. In the US, it was certified diamond. Global sales eventually hit around 25 million. The awards followed. It won Best Rap Album at the Grammys. The real Slim Shady grabbed Best Rap Solo Performance. The album was even nominated for Album of the Year. And despite the controversies, from Senate hearings to angry politicians, the impact was undeniable. This wasn't just another rap album. It was a cultural explosion, The Eminem Show. This was Eminem's 4th studio album, and it came out on May 26, 2002, earlier than planned, thanks to a leak that hit almost a month before the scheduled release. The label moved fast, and the early drop worked in their favor. Within a day, it sold over 280,000 copies, and by the end of the first week, it passed 1,300,000 in the US alone. Recording sessions happened between 2000 and 2002 across places like Encore in Burbank, 54 Sound in Michigan, and even Eminem's own house in Detroit. This time, Eminem took on most of the production himself, with some help from Jeff Bass, Denon Porter, and of course Dr. Dre overseeing everything. The production leaned into rock influences, not just samples, but full-on guitar and heavy drums blended with classic hip-hop structure. Lyrically, it pulled back from the Slim Shady chaos and showed more of the Marshall Mathers side. There was still humor and bravado, but tracks like Haley's, Song, and Sing for the Moment brought vulnerability and depth. The album tackled fame, politics, censorship, family, and the cost of success. Songs like White America and Square Dance went at the post-9/11 climate, and he didn't shy away from cultural commentary. Say Goodbye Hollywood wrestled with the idea of quitting. Until I Collapse brought pure energy without even being a single. The singles were stacked. Without Me came first and blew up right away. Cleaning Out My Closet dropped next and went deep into his personal life. Superman flipped the tone completely, and Sing for the Moment used a huge Aerosmith sample, with Steven Tyler even credited as a writer. Later, Business rounded things out with a more theatrical vibe. Till I Collapse never got a full release as a single, but has stayed one of his most streamed and downloaded songs for years. The album ran about 77 minutes and had 20 tracks total, including skits. Some clean versions got pretty hacked up. They even removed drips entirely in a few additions. The intro to Cleaning Out My Closet included a real recording mishap where the snare was muted, and Eminem left it in. That's the kind of personal touch this album had. The Eminem Show won Best Rap Album at the Grammys and Best Short Form Music Video for Without Me. It also got an Album of the Year nomination. It sold over 27 million copies worldwide in top charts across multiple countries. This one proved Eminem could lead with emotion, still be dangerous, and completely dominate. Encore. Eminem's 5th studio album dropped on November 12, 2004, a few days earlier than planned due to an online leak. Recorded between 2002 and 2004, the sessions took place across multiple studios, including his own house. and pulled in producers like Dr. Dre, Mike Elizondo, Mark Batson, and Eminem himself. Dre remained the executive producer, but Eminem handled more of the album's creative direction than ever before. The album's structure followed a familiar formula: 20 tracks with skits, political commentary, aggressive verses, personal moments, and a healthy dose of absurdity. Curtains Up opened it all, and Encore Curtains Down closed it with a dark, theatrical ending. That outro included a dramatized act where Eminem kills the audience and himself, followed by a farewell voice saying, "See you in hell." Subtle. The lead single, Just Lose It, stirred controversy, especially with its parody of Michael Jackson. Jackson wasn't amused. Other tracks kept up the satire. Ass Like, that mocked celebrity culture, My First Single, clowned on formulaic radio songs, and Rain Man leaned into nonsense wordplay. The second half of the album leaned more into comedic and cartoonish territory, and that's where criticism started to pile up. But there were deeper moments, like Toy Soldier sampled Martika and focused on Eminem's past beefs, calling for peace while acknowledging the damage done. Mosh took direct aim at President George W. Bush, dropping just before the 2004 election. Mockingbird stripped things back completely, delivering a message to his daughter Haley about family and loss. Those tracks reminded people he still had the lyrical focus when he wanted it. Never Enough featured 50 Cent and Nate Dogg. Spend Some Time added Obi Trice and Stat Quo to the mix. One Shot, Two Shot brought in D12. Eminem used his features sparingly, keeping the spotlight mostly on himself while weaving between real emotion and complete nonsense. Puke was a messy breakup song, both literally and figuratively, with sound effects that probably didn't need to be there. Commercially, Encore did numbers. In just 3 days, it moved over 700,000 copies in the US, eventually climbing past 5 million domestically. It debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200 and went quadruple platinum. Some global estimates put total sales closer to 11 million, though others claim much higher. Reception was mixed. Critics praised Mockingbird and liked Toy Soldiers, but hammered the weaker, sillier second half. Metacritic landed at 64 out of 100. Encore still earned a Grammy nomination for Best Rap Album, but many fans and critics saw it as a turning point, not necessarily upward. After this release, Eminem stepped back. What came next would look very different. Relapse. This was Eminem's 6th studio album, and it landed on May 15, 2009, marking his return after a 5-year break. The break wasn't just creative, it followed a real battle with addiction, which shaped the entire album. He recorded between 2006 and 2009 in studios from Michigan to Las Vegas. Most of the production came from Dr. Dre, with Eminem producing only one track solo, the more somber, Beautiful. The concept centered around relapse itself, falling back into addiction, slipping into old habits, and letting Slim Shady out of the cave. The result was a horrorcore-heavy, twisted, graphic collection full of violent fantasy and grotesque humor. From the jump, the Dr. West skid set a creepy tone, unraveling the therapy session into madness. The pill imagery on the album art drove the point home. Eminem's face formed by pills. The disc styled like a prescription bottle. The album had 20 tracks, including skits and interludes. Crack a Bottle hit number 1 on Billboard. We Made You was flashy and satirical. 3 a.m. went full horror movie. Beautiful broke from the chaos with a more introspective tone. A holdover from before sobriety fully took hold. Old Time's Sake brought back Dre for a loose, celebratory vibe. Same Song and Dance and Insane pushed the disturbing envelope, tapping into dark psychological themes, but wrapped in over-the-top delivery. A lot of tracks used a cartoonish accent, which drew major criticism. It exaggerated the Slim Shady character, but became distracting. Eminem later admitted it might have been overdone. He even joked about it in a later song, saying he ran them accents into the ground. Still, some fans embraced it. Over time, the album gained a kind of cult status, especially with listeners who appreciated its commitment to its twisted theme. Commercially, it dominated. In its first week, Relapse sold over 600,000 copies in the US. It held the top spot on the Billboard 200 and stayed on the charts for months. Eventually, it went triple platinum in the US and hit number 1 in countries like Australia, France, and New Zealand. It ended up as the top-selling hip-hop album of 2009. Critics were split. Many praised Dre's production and Eminem's technical rhyme skills, but others said the shock value wore thin and the heavy use of accents hurt the experience. On Metacritic, the album sat around 59 out of 100. Still, it won Best Rap Album at the Grammys and later got reissued as Relapse, Refill with bonus tracks. Eminem planned a sequel, Relapse 2, but scrapped it in favor of moving in a new direction, Recovery. This album showed a full 180 from what Eminem was doing just 1 year earlier. Recovery dropped in late June 2010, but it was already something different, even before fans heard a single track. It ditched the horrorcore vibes and dropped the accents from Relapse, replacing them with real pain, therapy-style lyrics, and a cleaner structure. The whole thing was supposed to be a sequel, but it grew into something else entirely. And honestly, that pivot was one of the smartest choices he made. The production lineup was stacked. You had names like Alex the Kid, Just Blaze, DJ Khalil Mr. Porter, and even Dr. Dre. Though Dre barely touched this one compared to past projects. Eminem also co-produced several tracks himself, which added to how personal the album felt. There were no random skits all over the place. Most additions just moved straight through the songs without detours. The features were solid. Rihanna, Lil Wayne, Pink, and a few lesser-known names like Liz Rodriguez and Sly Jordan added some fresh vocal support. The whole album ran just over 77 minutes with 17 tracks. And yeah, people showed up. It debuted at #1 on Billboard and sold over 741,000 copies in the first week alone. It stayed at the top for 7 non-consecutive weeks and hit #1 in 16 other countries. By the time 2010 wrapped, Recovery was the best-selling album on the planet. It even made history in the digital space, becoming the first album ever to hit 1 million digital downloads in the US. What really made Recovery hit differently was the writing. It didn't lean on characters or jokes. It dug into addiction, anxiety, fame, and all the fallout that came with it. Tracks like Going Through Changes and You're Never Over were stripped down and raw, while others like Cinderella Man leaned into full-on fight-back mode. It wasn't perfect, and critics didn't pretend it was. Some pointed to production that didn't always match the tone or lyrics that dragged, but most respected that it was honest and bold. It even picked up a Grammy for Best Rap Album and got nods for Album of the Year and more. Recovery didn't just clean the slate, it proved Eminem could evolve. The Marshall Mathers LP 2. This was Eminem's 8th studio album, released on November 5th, 2013, and designed as a follow-up to his 2000 classic. It revisited themes, characters, and sounds from that earlier project, but wrapped them in sharper production and layered storytelling. Recording ran from March 2012 to October 2013, across studios in Detroit, Malibu, Los Angeles, and Santa Monica. The final album clocks in at nearly 80 minutes, and the deluxe version adds 5 bonus tracks on a second disc. Dr. Dre and Rick Rubin served as executive producers, and a huge team of collaborators worked on production, including Eminem, DJ Khalil, Alex the Kid, Emil, DVLP, and more. Rubin's influence brought in old-school touches, scratching, strip beats, and heavy sampling. Eminem called on everything from Billy Squier to the Zombies, and even Beastie Boys-era Chaos shows up on Berserk. The singles dropped fast. Berserk came first, full of rowdy energy. Then Survival landed with a tie-in to Call of Duty. Rap God followed, turning heads with its non-stop speed and wordplay. The Monster with Rihanna went #1, and Headlights closed out the run in some regions, featuring Nate Ruess on a softer, emotional hook. The album's opener, Bad Guy, acts as a spiritual sequel to Stan. This time, it's Stan's brother seeking revenge, and the track flips perspectives in the final verses, showing Eminem confronting himself. Rhyme or Reason dives into father issues over a sample of the Zombies. Legacy uses melodic vocals from Polina while reflecting on pain and purpose. So Far plays off Joe Walsh's Life's Been Good, mocking celebrity quirks and modern fame. Love Game features Kendrick Lamar in a competitive, tongue-twisting back and forth. Other notable features include Skylar Grey on Asshole and Liz Rodriguez on Survival. Sales came fast. In the US, the album sold over 790,000 in its first week and reclaimed the #1 spot on Billboard 200 in its third week. By the end of 2013, it had sold over 1,700,000 copies in the US alone and became the second best-selling album in the country that year. It hit #1 in the UK, Australia, Canada, and more. Globally, it moved nearly 4 million copies by year's end. It's since been certified 4 times, platinum in the US. Critics were mostly positive, with praise for lyrical complexity and callbacks to his earlier work. Metacritic settled around 72. The album won Best Rap Album at the Grammys, and it's often viewed as a sharp, reflective midpoint in Eminem's career, part tribute, part reinvention. Revival. This was Eminem's 9th studio album, released December 15, 2017, and it came after a stretch of public quiet and creative uncertainty. He recorded it between 2016 and 2017, and the final product included 19 tracks, running over 77 minutes. The album was preceded by a viral campaign promoting a fake medication named Revival, complete with ads, websites, and phone numbers, all hinting at Eminem's return. Executive producers were Dr. Dre and Rick Rubin, but Dre's actual production presence was minimal. Instead, production came from a broadcast. Just Blaze, DJ Khalil, Mr. Porter, Emil, Fred Rick, Alex the Kid, and Skylar Grey, who also co-wrote and sang on several tracks. The album leaned hard into collaborations with pop singers Beyoncé, Ed Sheeran, Alicia Keys, Pink, Kehlani, and ex-ambassadors. The only rap feature, besides Eminem, came from Fresher. Lyrically, Revival was politically and socially charged. Tracks like Untouchable tackled race and police brutality. Like Home went directly at President Donald Trump. Walk on Water, the lead single with Beyoncé, explored artistic insecurity and fan expectation. River with Ed Sheeran focused on infidelity and emotional fallout. Framed was a throwback horrorcore fantasy. Chloroseptic pushed back on mumble rap and modern hip-hop trends. Many songs use singers to carry the choruses, giving the album a rock and gospel blend more than a straight rap edge. The sound was wide-ranging. It mixed rock, pop, soul, and heavy beats, but it often swerved into territory fans weren't used to. This included big, sweeping hooks and less aggressive flows. Some songs tried for stadium-style energy, while others sat in stripped-down emotional space. Castle and A Rose closed the album with letters to his daughter and a near-death experience, some of the most personal content he had released in years. Commercially, Revival debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200 and also top charts in the UK, Australia, and Canada. It was the UK's Christmas #1 album of 2017, but critically, the album was divisive. Metacritic averaged it at 5th out of 100. Reviewers said the lyrics were heavy-handed, the punchlines dated, and the pop collaborations overwhelming. Others praised the ambition and emotional vulnerability, even if the execution felt messy. Eminem later acknowledged the backlash and felt he had tried too hard to check every box. 8 months after Revival, he surprise released Kamikaze, which directly addressed the criticism. Still, Revival had its moments. Even if it stumbled, it was a reflection of a legacy artist trying to balance vulnerability, politics, and changing times all at once. Kamikaze. This one dropped without a whisper of warning. Eminem's 10th studio album came out swinging on August 31st, 2018 without even a teaser. No hype train, just straight up release and reaction. And it didn't take long before listeners figured out this thing was aimed directly at the backlash from his previous album. He'd already hinted at that frustration with a remix of Chloroseptic earlier in the year, but Kamikaze was the full clapback. The tone was aggressive, the style was raw, and the whole thing ran for just under 46 minutes. The album had major names behind it. Eminem and Dr. Dre handled executive production, with a long list of other producers like Tay Keith, Mike Will Made It, and Ronnie J jumping in on individual tracks. Eminem even took production credit on some songs himself, with Luis Resto helping out on both keyboards and behind-the-scenes work. Luis contributed on tracks like The Ringer and Stepping Stone, and his brother Mario Resto appeared on vocals too. Scratching by Scram Jones made its way onto the title track. And you've got features from Joyner Lucas, Royce da 5'9", Jesse Reyes, and a little hidden contribution from Justin Vernon on Fall. The visual design didn't go unnoticed either. The cover features a fighter jet's tail, looking like it's moments from Collision. There's graffiti all over the back of it, including the jet's tag reading TIKCUS, which, when reversed, says something cheeky. It mirrors the famous License to Ill cover by the Beastie Boys, whose jet also had a reversed phrase. Beastie Boys weren't looped in ahead of time, but when asked, they said they were flattered by the nod. The album's theme of collision, literal and lyrical, gets reinforced in the artwork too, with cracked concrete and smoke behind the aircraft. 13 tracks make up the album, including skits. Paul features Eminem's manager questioning the sanity of calling an album Kamikaze while attacking everyone. Stepping Stone leans emotional and reflects on the fall of D12. Fall hits out at critics and artists alike and stirred up some real backlash for its language. Venom wraps it all up and got featured in the Venom film, tying the album to a big studio release. Even with just a few singles like Fall, Lucky You, Good Guy, and Venom, the album made a lot of noise, and for a few days on streaming services, some tracks had mix-ups in the titles before being fixed. Commercially, it exploded right out of the gate. It debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200 with over 434,000 equivalent album units. 252,000 of those were traditional sales. It also marked Eminem's highest streaming week at the time, with over 225 million streams. A week later, it slid to #2 behind Paul McCartney, still pulling over 136,000 units. That was a nearly 70% drop. but it didn't matter much. By October, the Recording Industry Association of America had already certified it platinum, and by January the following year, it had sold more than 500,000 pure copies, making it the only solo album that year to hit that milestone in the US. Internationally, it hit number 1 in a ridiculous number of countries: the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, Italy, Sweden, Switzerland, and plenty more had Kamikaze sitting on top. In Germany, it started off at number 4, but actually climbed to number 2 the next week. On streaming charts, 5 tracks landed in Spotify's global top 10 during the debut week. The iTunes charts were just as wild, with multiple tracks hitting the top 10. By the end of 2018, the album had racked up over 1 million equivalent units in the United States, and nearly half of that came from pure sales. Worldwide, it was the 9th best-selling album that year. Critics were split. Some praised the return to form, the sharper, rapid-fire delivery, and battle-ready attitude. Others thought it sounded defensive and not exactly forward-thinking. There were definitely headlines about specific lyrics, and even Justin Vernon spoke up to distance himself from Fall. Eminem later said in an interview that he regretted a line on that track, admitting it hurt more people than he intended. The drama didn't stop there. He took shots at several artists, and the feud with Machine Gun Kelly went full scale, with responses flying back and forth. Not Alike kicked it off, MGK fired back with Rap Devil, and Eminem returned with Kill Shot. Other names caught some stray bars too: Lil Pump, Joe Budden, Iggy Azalea, and more. The album wasn't shy, and neither was the reaction. Some people loved the energy, others thought it felt stuck in an older version of rap. Still, Kamikaze managed to rewrite the conversation after revival, and it re-established Eminem as someone not willing to sit quietly while being dragged. Music to be murdered by. This one landed out of nowhere on January 17th, 2020. No build-up, no warning, just 20 tracks and a concept pulled straight from the Alfred Hitchcock vault. Eminem took inspiration from Hitchcock's 1958 album of the same name, and he didn't just nod to it. He sampled it in the intro, interludes, and outro, even weaving it into the track Little Engine. The whole thing feels like it was constructed as part of a bigger story arc that links back to relapse and recovery, like chapters in a saga about personal collapse, redemption, and chaos. It was recorded between September and December of 2018, released under Shady Records, Aftermath Entertainment, and Interscope Records. The album's structure mixes horrorcore, social commentary, lyrical agility, and blunt force trauma. Eminem said the idea for it popped into his head, and Dre still had the beat around, so they built it up from there. What came out was a tight 20-track experience that got extended later on with Side B, a deluxe version that dropped in December and added 16 more songs. When it came out, it debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200 with about 279,000 album equivalent units, 117,000 of those being pure sales. That gave Eminem his 10th consecutive number 1 album, setting a new record and breaking a tie with Ye. Globally, it topped charts in the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and a long list of others. US streams alone hit over 217 million in that first week. By the end of the year, it had crossed 1 million equivalent units in sales in the States, with nearly 250,000 of those being pure. Now let's talk features. Juice, appearance on Godzilla, was his first posthumous verse, recorded before his death in December of 2019. The song turned heads with Eminem's machine gun pace, spitting 229 words in 30 seconds, clocking in at over 11 syllables a second. That broke his own records from tracks like Rap God. There's also Young M.A. on Unaccommodating, where M hits even faster, peaking at over 13 syllables a second. Other guests across both sides include Ed Sheeran, Royce da 5'9", Anderson .Paak, Black Thought, Q-Tip, Don Toliver, Skylar Grey, and more. Ed Sheeran pops up on those kinda nights, while Side B brings in new energy with tracks like Tone Deaf, These Demons, and Black Magic. Production came from a mix of heavyweights and newer collaborators. Dre and Eminem both contributed, but so did others like D.A. Got That Dope, Tim Subi, and Ricky Rags. Side B even saw some bouncier, more melodic moments, giving it a slightly different tone, while keeping the wordplay sharp. Darkness stood out not just sonically, but thematically. It used layered metaphors to parallel Eminem's anxiety about performing with the internal state of a mass shooter, referencing the 2017 Las Vegas tragedy. The video ended with a direct call to action about gun laws and voting. It was one of the most controversial and talked about tracks. Praised for ambition, criticized for the subject matter. Then you've got Stepdad, a violent, revenge fantasy that returns to the dark, exaggerated territory M's known for. It doesn't shy away from ugly emotions, and it definitely pushed some buttons. Premonition opened the album by taking swings at critics, setting the tone early that he was not pulling punches. There's also the Hitchcock angle again. Alfred, interlude, and Alfred, outro, both pull audio straight from the original Hitchcock project. The whole album carries that cinematic crime thriller vibe, like a mixtape for a noir horror film. Lyrically, the album's packed with dense rhyme patterns, wordplay, and high-speed flows. At the same time, it's loaded with themes around control, public perception, artistic fatigue, and the desire to shock. Some moments are vulnerable, others deliberately provocative, and while a few tracks reach for pop crossover appeal, others dive headfirst into disturbing imagery. Critics were mixed. Metacritic gave it an average of about 64 out of 100. The technical skill got plenty of praise. Flow switches, rhyme stacking, vocal control, but the album caught criticism for falling back on tropes like violent fantasies and overused features. Some reviews knocked it for not evolving enough, for being stuck in older patterns. Others saw it as a balancing act between pop sheen and horrorcore grit. Side B got a better reception in some circles. It was seen as tighter, fresher, and more confident. The energy felt more focused, and the wordplay came with a little more punch. Fans especially appreciated how Side B didn't water down the concept, but added more layers. So while Music to Be Murdered By didn't reinvent Eminem's wheel, it definitely spun it hard. Between the Hitchcock theme, the sheer volume of tracks, the velocity of the bars, and the blend of introspection and brutality, the album carved out its own space in his discography. Not a soft reset, but not a rehash either. More like a sharpened blade from the same drawer. The Death of Slim Shady, Coup de Grace. Eminem's 12th studio album, released on July 12, 2024, wasn't just another addition to his catalog, it was a full-blown conceptual send-off. The title gives it away before you even hit play. Coup de Grace literally means final blow, and this time, the target was Slim Shady. The whole thing was built as a narrative clash between Marshall Mathers and his darker, chaotic alter ego. But of course, it's not that simple. Nothing with Eminem ever is. The album opens with Marshall facing off against Slim Shady, positioning Shady as the reckless antagonist, pressuring him to return to his wildest tendencies. Throughout the songs, that back and forth spirals into conflict, rejection, and eventually, a symbolic kill shot. But don't get too confident calling it a clean execution. The narrative blurs the lines. Slim is killed, but the album plays with the idea that maybe it was all a dream, or worse, that Shady's still lurking somewhere. Tracks like Guilty Conscience 2 take that inner war and crank it up, revisiting the dynamic with even more venom than before. The themes are stacked with symbolism. This isn't about a literal death, it's a creative reinvention. The death is Eminem confronting the persona that made him a household name, but also drew decades of controversy. Critics have called it a moment of maturity, where Eminem tries to step out from under the shadow of Slim Shady's obsession with shock value. He's not just distancing himself, he's turning the persona into a cautionary tale. Promotion leaned into the narrative hard. Before the album dropped, Eminem ran a full fake obituary for Slim Shady in the Detroit Free Press. During the 2024 NFL Draft, he aired a teaser styled like a true crime show called Who Killed Slim Shady, painting the whole concept as a musical mystery. Then came the album, along with a PSA from M himself, telling fans to listen in order, or else none of it would make sense. That statement made it clear. This wasn't a playlist, it was a storyline. The album's got 19 songs in the standard version, with some deluxe editions pushing it past 20. The total runtime lands a little over 1 hour. The guest list is stacked, but not bloated. Appearances include White Gold, Skylar Grey, Bizarre, Big Sean, Babytron, Jid, and Sly Piper. It's a mix of new blood and old ally, and everyone shows up with purpose. You're not hearing features for the sake of filler. Each artist plugs into the storyline in different ways. On the production side, Eminem handled a chunk of it himself alongside longtime collaborators. Dr. Dre, Luis Resto, and Fred Wreck returned, joined by others like Q Beats and Cole Bennett. The sound bounces between eerie cinematic beats and gritty drum patterns, keeping things unpredictable but cohesive. There's a clear effort to match the atmosphere with the psychological tension built into the concept. Lyrically, this thing goes deep, beyond the usual wordplay, rhyme stacking, and vocal acrobatics. It's about identity, memory, betrayal, and guilt. Tracks reference everything from his childhood and family trauma to the industry critics who've never let him breathe. The death of Slim Shady gives him a way to interrogate not just who he's been, but what that persona did to him. And to his legacy, reception's been mixed, but not lukewarm. Some critics are impressed with the commitment to the concept, even if they think the execution gets messy. Pitchfork called the second half confusing and less clear about whether Slim's really gone or just hiding in the basement. Others pointed out that the whole Eminem versus himself gimmick has been played before, and this time it's more theatrical than transformative. But for every critic questioning it, there are listeners who appreciate the ambition. Some argue that Slim Shady doesn't actually die, he's just put on ice. The album leaves the door cracked open. Is the persona gone? Or is Marshall just pretending he's finally in control? That ambiguity's kind of the point. The cover art teases it too, showing a knife wound but no closure. The Guardian picked up on that, noting how the visual hints at death while keeping things abstract. USA Today described the album as a blend of punchlines, wounds, and heartfelt moments. More of a messy funeral than a clean goodbye. Still, the commercial response was strong. It debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200, marking yet another chart topper for Eminem. And for an album that dives into self-conflict and reinvention, it stayed accessible enough to connect with longtime fans. Even with all the chaos and contradiction, there's a sense that Eminem used this as a way to recalibrate. Maybe not to erase Slim Shady, but to give himself permission to evolve. Whether or not Slim's really gone, that part's still up for debate. If you enjoyed this, I'm going to be posting a lot here. I would greatly appreciate it if you could subscribe. Thanks for watching.